Are you satisfied with your understanding of sustainability? If you are not, imagine a journey together, a pluralistic one, with academia, innovators, startups, NGOs, all looking for solutions to the greatest challenge of our time. My name is S.1E.75, and this is the Sustainability Journey. Welcome to another episode, and today we will discuss something that is really close to my heart, something that I really like: conservation, environment, people, Africa. And we do this with a foundation that is in piloting something that is really important, that conservation that is transfrontier, bringing peace and harmony also in Africa. And we do it with the CEO of Peace Park Foundation, Werner Myburgh. Werner, thank you so much for being here with us.
Samuel, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast and looking forward to the discussion today.
Peace Park Foundation, it's really at the forefront of conservation. Mandela was there when they built it with a wonderful idea, removing barriers. And we will discuss that. But as usual, the question we start: who is Werner? How you have become a change maker in this field?
Samuel, it's the easy one. As far back as I can remember, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I always wanted to be a game ranger. I always wanted to do something in nature conservation. And my parents would often say, but there's no money in nature conservation. Why do you want to do that? Why don't you want to be a pilot or a doctor or anything else? And I always said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a game ranger. So it was something that from a very early age, I've been out in the field and in the bush. And from very early on, I volunteered and I worked in Kruger National Park for a year and while I was studying full time. And my professional studying was in ecology at the university. And at the same time, I also did a diploma in nature conservation. So I did it too. It later became a degree, a BTech degree, but I did it too at the same time and worked in conservation on a voluntary basis whenever I had an opportunity. And then I took a gap year in Africa, solo traveling. And then when I came back, I started looking for a job. And the first real job that I got was Peace Park Foundation. The CEO then, Dr. John Hanks, he got my CV. I sent it to them. I loved the concept of the cross-border conservation of linking ecosystems and national parks across international boundaries. I sent him my CV. I haven't had any experience. And he said, well, I've got a 6-week assignment for you. And that was in 1998. So the 6 weeks assignment has become 25 years. I've been with the organization from the very beginning. And the beginning was incredibly important foundational years with Dr. Anton Rupert, our founder. He was a philanthropist and a businessman. And he invited President Mandela to become the honorary patron of Peace Park Foundation. And the concept being, we needed an organization that can act as a neutral facilitator and bring countries around the table to agree on the principle that nature has no boundaries and that these international borders is very much political, it's very much colonialist, and it's very artificial. And it didn't recognize ecosystems, it didn't recognize migration patterns of wildlife. It didn't recognize cultural clans where people live in the landscape. It was, so in a sense, it was redressing that, but also recognizing that there's a need for a larger ecosystems-based approach for conservation and not separated by fences and artificial borders. And you can imagine in the beginning, that was quite difficult because South Africa was just coming out of apartheid years. Mozambique just came out of a war for 16 years, and there was a lot of civil wars in the whole region. But unanimously, all the heads of state, when you spoke with them about the concept of saying, let's take hands, let's cooperate formally through means of MOUs or treaties, all of the heads of state were supportive. And even up until today, we have some of the former heads of state on our board. And the current heads of state, the presidents of these countries, are patrons of Peace Park Foundation. So we had that high-level support and endorsement. We set out as an organization to be a facilitator and a broker. We were very small. We were a team of 6 people, including the driver and the messenger and the person cleaning the office. So we were quite tiny, but the vision was quite bold and ambitious, is to look at Africa, look at Southern Africa in particular, and see how can you connect these protected areas. Now, what is interesting is that 80% of all the protected areas in Africa lies close to an international border. So it was logical that you try and have those connectivity being maintained. To illustrate it very basically, if you have an elephant in Kruger National Park, he doesn't know there's a political border, right? It's an elephant and it goes where there's food and water and safety. So removal of these impediments is also good for, obviously, the nature, but it's also good for tourism because people are attracted in conservation to large areas. So Kruger Park gets 2 million visitors a year. And the main reason for that is got the big five, but it's also big. It's the size of Israel. It's 20,000 square kilometers. So what these parks has been doing is bringing countries around the table and facilitating this process. The heads of state sign treaties. But that's just the beginning, right? That's just on paper. So the last decade or so, we've been quite involved in operations on the ground. So really trying to, so it's a fantastic concept, but there has to be change on the ground. For that, you need to invest quite a significant amount of money. You have to bring a lot of skills to the conservation, protect areas, and you have to restore and rehabilitate quite extensively. And South Africa, those years were really advanced. They had well-functioning managing parks. And in some of the countries like Mozambique, there wasn't a park on the Mozambican side. There was a hunting block called Qatar 16. So what we did quite a lot is then starting to invest and restoring these protected areas that was there on paper, but on the ground, it was non-existent, or there was very, very little protection taking place. And we've done that now quite extensively, especially in Mozambique, which is the country where we work in partnership with government to co-manage 4 protected areas, but we also have expanded that work into other countries like Zambia or Malawi, and also recently we had discussions with Angola and Zimbabwe and other countries. So it's taking this concept of large level landscapes and bringing protected areas together across international boundaries, that you can have more space for animals and also a better global competitive attraction for tourists to come and see these large landscapes. And that's sort of the drive. But we don't do that in isolation of the landscape, right? So there's people living there, there's livelihoods, there's a lot of challenges on the ground. But we believe tourism is ultimately one of those very critical economic drivers, especially in Africa, where we don't have massive industrialization. We don't have, a lot of export of goods and services. Perhaps less so on the good side, except raw materials. So that's from the mining sector, but that's finite. It comes to an end, where tourism is a never-ending business, right? If you look after an area and you've got, in Africa, there's no comparison anywhere in the world to these large charismatic mammal species, elephants and lions and leopards. So it puts us in a very unique space, a very competitive space, if you can look after this. And, people from all over the world will continue to come and see this because it's really, really magnificent. So that's the premise, is that it's fantastic for development. It's sustainable job creation. It's good for the region in terms of politics, because presidents and ministers and departments cooperate across international boundaries. So it's also good for international relations and peace building. If you would say, what is Peace Parks about in one sentence? We are about conservation at scale.
Very interesting. Conservation at scale. And I really liked in your description, the work that you are doing is pioneering. As you said, just not only the single national park, but linking countries together, bringing back again migration routes and area and this wilderness that was there before the treaty, and the boundaries and all was in the last centuries. And also, I think cleaning and restoring open the old wounds and bringing peace in the region. You have discussed, I think, a really interesting the case. I want to ask really now, if you can tell us some stories of your impact, of your work along all these years, and especially from 2010 when you are the CEO.
It's obviously a privilege to be in an organization where you see that you make a difference. I think I feel really, really very lucky, and we've got incredible staff, an incredible board, and incredible supporters and partners and donors. And I'll give you a practical example. In 2015, in the Great Limpopo landscape, which is 3 countries, Mozambique and Zimbabwe and South Africa, We're looking at a landscape of about 100,000 square kilometers. That's about 60,000 square miles to restore this. So it's massive, right? It's pretty big. And in this landscape, there is a couple of national parks on the Mozambican side. One of them is called S.1E.75. Now, when we visited S.1E.75 in 2015, and we were there in April 2015 to see whether we can help the government to restore this park. We traveled around. It was beautiful, but it was very remote. It still is very remote, very difficult to access. We traveled for days by car to get there. There was no real roads, and everything was overgrown. The cars were scratched. But we got to this park, and the most beautiful trees and most beautiful baobab trees, massive baobab trees, on this beautiful Salve River. And we were driving around and looking, and there was one thing that struck me after about 2 days is that I couldn't put my finger on it. Something really bothered me, and I just didn't understand what it was. And then I realized, but it's completely silent. There's no life. There's no birds. There's no bird sound. There's no birds singing. There's no insects. There's absolutely nothing. It's a beautiful landscape, but no life. It was very, very bizarre. And that's where it was. And then we went to the government of Mozambique, and we said, we really think this is a very important area. Historically, it was a famous area for hunting, and it was proclaimed as a national park in 1973, especially for its protection of giraffe. It was an area with a lot of giraffe. And so very sad in going there in 2015, and there was no more animals. And so we started on this journey. We signed a 20-year agreement with the government of Mozambique, a co-management agreement, and we took hands and we said, let's jointly work together as partners and rehabilitate and restore this park. And the government of Mozambique came on board, and they, really put their staff resources to this, and we brought financial resources, and we had a number of fantastic donors that came on board quite quickly. And so the journey started with S.1E.75, and that was 7 years ago. So the end of 2015, we signed the agreement. So effectively started 2016, beginning of 2016, and we started with bringing in more capacity, more people, and creating a management team, a management steering committee or a board, if you like, and rehabilitating the park. Now, the first thing we needed to do is we needed to upskill staff and appoint staff and make sure that there's proper protection. If you want to bring back wildlife, you have to have people that can look after the wildlife. So we did that. And then once we did that, we started bringing back animals. And to date, we I think the last count is just close to 2,500 animals that we reintroduced to S.1E.75. But we also built staff accommodation and a head office and entrance gates. And we built about 400 kilometers of roads and another 1,000 kilometers of tracks. And we built a big sanctuary. And today, so where we went from 2015, 2016, really very little life, not birds, to 2020, beginning of 2023, we have a park with a big five. Now, what does that mean? That means there's rhino back, both black and white, which is, as you know, the black rhino is critically endangered. We have elephant back, we have leopard back, we have buffalo back. I think we've got probably close to 1,000 buffalo already in the park. And then we're also, quite interestingly, lions coming back to the park by themselves. Now, we think they might have walked from Kruger National Park or from Zimbabwe, which is hundreds of kilometers away. And the first lion arrived there in September 2021, a big male lion, and he just arrived out of the blue. We saw him on a camera trap. And now we see him all the time. And then 2 weeks ago, we even saw a female and a cub. We saw the tracks, and then the rangers said that they spotted them. It's been an incredible journey that you have now the first Big Five park in Mozambique, which have these charismatic species. And you've got this really thriving national park. And now we are in a journey of putting back tourism infrastructure and obviously welcoming the first visitors. So for me, it's just very much showing you how resilient nature is, how important it is to have partnerships, so government and NGOs partnering, and how quickly you can actually change things around completely. So for me, it's a fantastic story of hope of what the future of conservation can be in Africa. And with proper resources and good people, you can turn around areas that really was devastated, burns down every year, and really had a very sad story. And even the people there was no economic activity. There was no job creation, no job prospects. And currently we employ, and the park employs, upwards of 200 people from the community at any given moment, in addition to into the rangers. And also now the government has seconded a lot of staff. So suddenly you've got this economic driver, not that the park makes money. It takes a long time to break even, but there is definitely a positive momentum. And what we see now is other parties join, and the Hunger Project says, oh, but we want to do a community development project. And other organizations, International Anti-Poaching Foundation is now on the other side with Qatar 5, and they are investing in that region. And we have NGOs, other NGOs, and other donors coming on board. So when we went in there, there was nobody and there was no interest. And now you have US entities. We've got the GEOS Foundation. We've got the German Postcode Lottery. You've got so many new donors, the Andre Hofmann Foundation, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, the Marva Foundation, and all of these donors, BioFund, etc., saying, we want to be part of this success story and we want to help. That's just a sort of illustration of how it can be done now, and how you can rehabilitate and turn something around completely. On the people element, we also
that's the other part. One thing is how you ensure the community around and the people part.
So one thing that we do is, and it's a government law, 20% of the park revenue is shared with the community in structures, community structures, 20% of the revenue generated, but also there's an extensive community development program. And we do that. We've got quite a number of programs. A lot of our work is focused around food security, because we think if people are food secure and less vulnerable to climate change, remember they're completely dependent on rainfall for their harvests. And if you can make them more food secure and have more stable food, then they start thinking about education and other things. So it's sort of the basic foundation. So we focus a lot on that. And we've got a program with conservation agriculture where we work with all the communities around the park. We did water provision for all the communities around the park. And also, obviously, looking at other alternative mechanisms, financing mechanisms. We are investigating carbon. We did a feasibility study that's been concluded. I think it's very exciting, the results of that, because there's so massive deforestation historically around the protected area, and even inside the park. When we arrived there, they were logging inside the park 15 kilometers away from the head office, for example, of the park. All of that stopped. It was extensive logging. And so a lot of our work is also linked to looking at carbon as a vehicle to finance conservation. Of course, there's a lot of, the methodology is not perfect, and we saw the Guardian article, but the RED mechanism, and looking at community-based carbon forest conservation is the only thing that we have at the moment where you can empower people, give them financial support to look after their own forests. It's either that or somebody comes in. It's usually the Chinese. It's usually people that come in that's very extractive. They've got a lot of power. They have money, and they pay people to cut down their own trees. And it's extremely sad to see it happening. And these people are desperate, so they do that. So they're destroying their own natural heritage just to survive. And so you've got a lot of that exploitation. And certainly to have an alternative where you pay for them to protect it, of course, and it's far better. With all of its flaws and criticisms, I still think RED is the best that we have at the moment in the absence of anything better. So that's just one story of one park, and I think we've replicated that. Maputo National Park in Mozambique, again, from 2008, Peace Park signed an agreement with the government. Today, it is paradise. We've put in over 5,000 animals in Maputo National Park, which is quite a lot. If you think about it, giraffe and zebra and wildebeest and all of these animals, they are big, they are difficult to move, elephants, etc. And we today have a park, and we did our last count, and we had now over 13,000 animals in this park, in Maputo National Park. And the third lodge is opening in April this year. The visitor numbers are skyrocketing. The revenue for the park is skyrocketing. It's got a marine component, and we're in the process of proclaiming it as a World Heritage Site. So Maputo National Park is just another incredible success story that we're very proud of. And so that's what we do. Zinov is part of a larger landscape. It links to Gonarezhou in Zimbabwe, and Banin in Mozambique, and Limpopo in Mozambique, and Kruger National Park. So it's part of this big landscape, but also Maputo National Park. It's part of a bigger landscape with Swaziland and South Africa. So our strategy is to rehabilitate core protected areas, and then in the next phase, look at the ecological linkages between those, and which is a purely community development intervention. And of course, overlying all of that is your strategy sustainability. So how do you keep financing this? Tourism, we saw, is very fickle with COVID. It's very volatile. So alternative financing mechanisms where we look at carbon, we're investigating biodiversity credits, where we're looking at bringing on board the private sector. There's so much money in the private sector and people want to do good, but there's no pipeline for investment. There's no pipeline for doing good, but also doing business, because a lot of people philosophically don't want to just hand out money. So, there must be a business case. So we focus a lot also on the business case of things. I think last, governance, which is so key in all of this, and we are on the verge of signing 2 agreements quite soon over the next 2 months in Malawi and Zambia, where we have taken the concept of conservation one step further in partnership with governments. We're now actually creating special purpose vehicles. And it's a little bit technical, but think about it. You're creating an entity for a park, and that entity then manages the park. And on the board of this entity, so it's like a little company that you create, and on the board of the company is government and Peace Parks Foundation or other NGOs or other partners in private sector. And so what you do is you want to still have government provide the lead and still own the asset, and they chair the company and they're on the board of the company. But you also want private sector principles, and you also want that transparency in financial management, and you also want accountability, right, and performance management, and all the things that governments are not strong at, but private sector are strong at. So we're blending this by creating little entities per protected area that I believe is the future of conservation, because governments don't necessarily have all the resources to look after these protected areas. These protected areas rarely are financially viable if you're not very efficient, and if you're not very innovative, and if you're not very flexible and understanding the market drivers and really tapping into revenue streams. But at the same time, so you bring that business ethics and principles into conservation, but you maintain government as a lead and owner and oversight at a policy level and at a strategic level. So that's, for me, quite exciting about where we are as an organization now, where we do more and more of that. And I think that will expand quite a bit in the future in many parts in Africa.
It's really interesting. And the discussion, I can see you have given a very interesting perspective on how to blend conservation to make it work, and also putting the people I really like the governance side. We discuss a lot about the community, but also the governance, because to ensure transparency in the way is a stepping stone, a fundamental stepping stone for the long-term sustainability. When the agreement, the 20-year or 30-year or 40-year, they will expire. I want to ask a forward-looking question about how do you see, we have seen that in the next 10, 15 years, and you have already discussed a bit about the special vehicles, but how we can blend and transform, conservation, especially. How do you see also the vision for Peace Park? You said Malawi, Zambia. Where do you want to bring the organization in the future?
I think we are in a real crisis moment, but we also are in a real opportunity still. I think the next decade will be the most important decade for the future of ecosystems and natural resources in Africa. And if we don't safeguard and keep intact critical ecosystems, Africa is going to be in trouble, because the population growth is the highest already in the world, and it's going to be the most populous continent by 2100. So it's in less than 8 years from now, we're looking at 4 billion plus people on the African continent. We have 36 million people more every single year in Africa. So the pressure on the natural resources is just going to continue to escalate, and that is exacerbated. It's made far worse as a result of climate change. And if you think about it, people are completely dependent on climate. 80% of people are living in the rural landscapes in Africa, and they're dependent on what the environment is doing to them. And so with very little inputs into agriculture. So what does the future hold? Obviously, conservation is not the only answer, but it's part of the answer. It's important that we strategically look at landscapes in harmony with people. So how can we help people to live in coexistence with nature, as opposed to extractive and exploitative? Because if you take away the forest, it's erosion, it's topsoil loss, it's desertification. Yeah, and so restoration is key in this process, and preservation is key in this process. The big thing for us is scale. What we are doing as Peace Parks Foundation, working at, even on 600,000 square kilometers, and if you look at all 10 of our transfer to conservation areas, we need a lot more. So scale is critical. We, for example, are looking at other mechanisms. We have partnered with Conservation International in a program called Herding for Health. And Herding for Health is about helping people that manage their livestock, helping to do it better, because cattle and livestock, 80% of the arable land is utilized by people with cattle, right? And in sub-Saharan Africa, and 5% of the actual meat production comes from that. 95% comes from the commercial side. So you've got this massive use of land for grazing, but it's not productive and it's not sustainable. There's a lot of overgrazing. There's a lot of vulnerability to climate change. So we've got massive transformation and loss of and degradation of land. So our program called Herding for Health is working with communities where they then start collectively grazing their cattle as a village. It's not, I've got my 5 cattle here and I've got my 500 cattle there. Let's put all the cattle together and let's get professional herders to herd the cattle on a grazing plan. So it's good for the environment, for the veld. It rests, the grass can rest in some times of the year when it's vulnerable. And rotational grazing is good for the cattle, right? It's good for the environment. And then the improvement of the animals, also supported with veterinary health. They improve their conditions significantly and then are able to get more money in their pocket, right? So very, very basic thing. So I think those type of interventions. Other one, of course, is our carbon program. We partner with carbon partners and looking at protecting large forests and having the private sector as a partner to buy the credit offsets and to protect those forests. So for me, those are scalable opportunities. So the Peace Park's vision of landscapes, connecting protected areas, the Herding for Health vision of looking at working with people to really look at land restoration, but also land management and pasture management, carbon. So for me, that's the exciting part. And that's the part that we really need to focus on is how can we scale interventions where you work with people in a landscape, where you enhance what they've been doing all along and improving what they've been doing all along by not being too disruptive in what they're doing or their culture or the way that they used to do it, but just trying to improve mechanisms of land use. So that's for me the future, is to really look at scale. And we also have to remember, Africa is the lungs of the world. Huh? I mean, here's the largest intact forest, the largest intact savanna landscapes left. But it's going quite quickly. Definitely, there's an urgent need. Definitely the next 10 years will be telling. We don't get much more of what we do in many other organizations, not just Peace Park. There's many organizations working in Africa. But we need more support, we need more awareness. That's our vision, is to scale, to keep on doing what we're doing, and to do it in partnership with the many as possible partners.
It's really important. I really like the vision and the scale and the complexity. I really like how you have put together the complexity of the problems, community, traditional practices, and of course the trends and the emergence coming from abroad and from the global system. So it's really something that can work together, and the scaling of the vision. We are going towards the end of the podcast. I want to ask the usual final call for action we ask to our guests. What do you want to tell to our global audience?
I think conservation begins at home. And I think everybody has a role and a responsibility to look first and foremost at their own lifestyle. What do they eat? What do they wear? How do they travel? How do they commute? That's the first thing that you should do. If you want to support conservation in Africa, do so through credible organizations that has a track record and that are operational on the ground, because that's where it counts. And there's many organizations like Peace Parks. I'm not advocating Peace Parks. I'm advocating the need and the urgency. Peace Parks, of course, we also have our own website. We also have our own LinkedIn account, and we're on Instagram and Facebook and all the platforms. And it also might be interesting, we also created the Peace Parks TV channel, where our staff in our various areas where they work contribute and share what it is to build a park or rehabilitate it or introduce lions or elephants into a park. And sometimes I think that's quite interesting. So go and look at peaceparkstv.com. It might be interesting. And also, if you want to make a contribution, go and look on our website. We've got offices in the US, the Netherlands, in Sweden, in the UK, of course, in Switzerland and elsewhere. And so have a look at our website. It's peaceparks.org.
That is also the way the podcast has started, to giving voice to people, to change maker like you, that are really fostering the change that we need on our planet to solve the emergencies, in this case the conservation and its broader social and economic dimension as well. Werner, thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure having you, and I'm sure we will maybe have another episode in 1 year or something to see where have you taken this wonderful organization. Thank you so much.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.